Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AiArthritis Voices 360. This is the official talk show for the International Foundation for Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis, or AiArthritis for short. And we are doing something super fun right now. This is the first time since November when we started our talk show that we are literally live streaming on Facebook. And my name is Tiffany, and I am your one of your co-hosts today. I am a repeated co-host on the show, and I am also the CEO of the organization and a person living with arthritis diseases. My diagnosis is non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. That's long. It's almost as long as like our organization name. But I'm not alone. If you're watching, you see somebody here with me. Say hi to Traci. Hi, Traci.
Hi, Tiffany and everybody. How are you?
Good. Traci, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Traci Brown. I live in Southern Maryland, and I was diagnosed in 2004 with adult-onset Still's disease after a very long journey to a diagnosis.
Okay, well, we are definitely going to get more into that because this is what we do as an organization. We are people who live with these diseases, who use our voices and help others use their voices in order to identify the issues that need to be solved. And then we work with other stakeholders as equal partners at the table to solve those
Yep.
problems. And we're going to give some examples about that today. But let's see. Let's just go back for a minute. So Traci, I don't remember exactly when I met you. I know that you had sent inquiries to volunteer a while ago, a few years ago. And the reason I remember is because Traci Brown and Tammy Brown, because our co-founders Tammy Brown, and I remember going, is Tammy applying to be a volunteer? And then I saw it was you. Um,
Yeah.
but we really connected the last few years, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
With go and that was because of the International Stills Disease Foundation, correct?
That is correct. When when you and I started communicating a lot more, ISDF had actually started to kind of dissolve itself, and you stepped in. Your organization at that time stepped in to give us a hand and maintain ad. And I was also working as an administrator for the Facebook still support group that ISDF had started under Mom and Dad Himes.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
tell you, without you guys, I think that the whole environment that we had would have fallen apart.
Oh, well, that was that was really a tough time, I know, for a lot of people. So, as a little history for those who are listening, one of the things that we do as an organization, so we are all about having patients as equals at the table, but we also have what we call a global network philosophy. So, we are continuously building relationships because we need those so that together we can solve problems, right? We need all
Right.
parties to solve problems. So one of our the initial program we started in 2012 as an organization was World Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis Day, which you can see if you are watching this. Traci's got an auto shirt on. She's got an auto themed shirt on, and I have an auto backdrop, which is actually the museum that our auto ball as an organization, this gala, that's why we're streaming this live, was supposed to be in St. Louis, Missouri. And Traci, you were going to come in and join us. Also, you were going to
I
be
know,
here.
I'm so
Uh,
excited, but then I got
that
heartbroken.
I know, but then COVID-19 took over and said, "Get back inside, everybody." So anyway, we that's how we met the International Stills Disease Foundation. They were one of the original nonprofits that we reached out to in 2012 and said, "Hey, here's who we are. We have this awareness day. It's not for us. I mean, it's not in honor of our organization. It's in honor of all people in the world living with these diseases, and Still's disease falls under that category." So we that's how we got involved. And then over the years, working together, which is one of the projects that we're going to talk about, we were partnered with International Stills Disease Foundation. And when they decided it was time to dissolve, it was in 2016 they made the decision. And
Yeah.
they came to us and said, um, we trust your organization and you're international as well as they were, and we don't want the community to be just left with no one. And we never claimed to be the new Still's Disease Foundation. I mean, we cover several diseases, but we said we agree. We want to make sure that the Stills community still has the support group that was brought on. They still have a home. They know that there's an organization out there that's got their back, that's really
Yeah.
trying hard to help with their needs. And so in 2017, when they did dissolve, we took over to house all of their existing
And
the
not to interrupt,
leftover.
but I think that's at that same point that I made a commitment, not just to myself, but to everybody in that support group, that I was going to hold it together somehow. If it was by glue and rubber bands and, you know, whatever you want to call it, duct tape, as my oldest daughter says. But I knew I needed to keep that group together because we're a family. And
Ah,
and that's
yes.
the one thing that I've always said. We're a family of people that have a common bond, and sometimes we feel alone.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely. And that's really telling too when we go back and we talk about our organization and the importance of having the patient voice involved in everything. Uh we all have this common goal to stay together, to be a united voice, to have a place where we find others like us who understand. And so I think that's a really good transition into what we're talking about today. So some of the things that we do as an organization, we focus on education or awareness,
yeah,
advocacy, which is also public policy, and research. And there are a couple projects we wanted to highlight, but we also wanted to get anyone who is watching right now or listening right now to get involved, because that's what this show is all about. We hear an issue, in this case, patients. The topic here for both of these projects that we're going to mention is that our diseases, while there are some similarities, we are not all textbook. We are not all textbook. And what that means is we may not match the criteria or the bullet pointed list of symptoms or disease features that you would see if you went to a Mayo Clinic or something online that you are looking for. We tend to have some unique characteristics, and that can lead to a lot of issues. It can lead to especially detection. And if you've tuned into any of our shows thus far over the last 2 days, you'll hear we focus a lot on that early detection to diagnosis. We also
yeah,
focus on after the diagnosis. We just haven't gotten to those podcasts yet. So those talk shows. So those are coming up here
yeah.
over the next couple of days. But Traci, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your Still's disease and your journey, because you said it took a little while, and why and how being non-textbook could have factored into that.
Well, my journey started with symptoms when I was about 16, 17. You know, I didn't have the chronic fever, but I was tired all the time, that chronic fatigue syndrome, joint pain. I mean, to the point that I couldn't walk. I mean, I was just tremendously in a lot. I went to the doctor after every time I went to the doctor, they're like, oh, go away. It's all in your head. You know, here's some 800 ibuprofen, you know, and the symptoms would rise and subside. And at that time, I was also dealing with chronic ear infections. So every time I ended up on antibiotics, I felt better.
Mm,
So, like, okay. And this was this journey that I took across a lifetime from 16, 17 until 2003, actually 2002, 2003 time period. My husband came home and found me on the kitchen floor because I had had horrible, horrible chest pains. I couldn't breathe. It hurt. I was just unaware. I had tried to call him. He got me to the hospital. They thought I had a pulmonary embolism, started treating me for that. And then my got discharged and the doctor sent me off to a cardiologist. Well, the cardiologist figured out that I had the pericarditis and the
I'm familiar.
endocarditis.
For
Yeah.
those who I've been dealing with this
And
for a couple months now. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, and I went in after having a bunch of tests done and her going over results. And when I went in, she's like, "You just look like dog do, so to speak." I said, "Well, I've been in bed running a high fever, 104, 105, sleeping all the time. I have no energy. I hurt." She's like, let me guess, you have a rash? And I said, yeah, it's on my arm and my chest, and it comes up on my face. And she goes, okay, I'm going to have you do this. Gave me a lab order for a bunch of lab work. She's like, I want you to call this doctor, make an appointment. Sent me off to a rheumatologist. She never gave me a clue what she thought it was.
Okay.
So within a week, I had an appointment with the rheumatologist. They sent me off, he sent me for some additional tests and more labs. And I came back and he goes, you have adult onset Still's disease. And he left it at that. He's like, here is the Plaquenil. Here is the steroids to boost it, to make it work better. And I'll see you in about 3 weeks. And he saw me in about 3 weeks. And I jokingly call steroids my false security blanket, because I got until you take the steroids away, obviously. But yeah, it was a long journey. I felt alone. I'd never heard of adult onset Still's disease. Everything I was finding, it was a death sentence to me. You know, what are their treatment options? There's really not much. You know, um, and it kind of went from there. And I found the International Still's Disease Foundation and started, joined at that time, their email group through Yahoo groups, and it kind of grew from there. And I worked very closely with several of them, and I had to take some time off because I wasn't doing well and things like that. So I came back probably around 2011 to the group and found them back on Facebook. At that point, that was the beginnings of me really connecting back in and realizing that, I ran across a lot of doctors that didn't know what Still's disease was.
And I myself, I'm not diagnosed with Still's disease, but I am extremely familiar with Still's disease. And one of the reasons that our organization founded in the first place was because we heard from like myself living, well, at the time it was rheumatoid arthritis. It's changed to non-radiographic axial spondy. But what we realized was we all had very similar onset stories. The symptoms may change a little bit. Like you had a high fever, I had a low fever. We both had the extreme fatigue, right?
Right.
And there are some features that are similar regardless. And then the struggle getting the diagnosis, the treatments are very similar. So we share those things and those struggles. And and that's one of the reasons why I say I understand. So it's not just because I hear people talking about it. It is also a lived experience that we
You've
all,
lived
no
it.
matter what your diagnosis is, we get it. I mean, we
Yeah.
understand. We can relate to each other, I think, in that way.
And
One of the
side,
things,
and
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
as a side note into that, during the initial years of trying to get a name and a diagnosis for what I had, I also had to deal with military doctors at naval hospitals and naval clinics. And, they were huge. And here's 800 ibuprofen, go away.
Mhm.
They didn't want to look beyond the surface and see it.
Mhm.
And I just recently had somebody join the group that's on active duty that was diagnosed by a military doctor. And I'm like, oh my God, 3 weeks, you had symptoms for 3 weeks and got a diagnosis. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking,
that's pretty amazing. And that actually leads me to my first question. So for those who are attending live, and if we would like to know, first of all, if you are a person living with these diseases, how long did it take you to get diagnosed? Because often we find that it takes a few years, let's say, average 2 to 3, and that's a pretty broad range because some of the diseases take longer than others. to
Right.
diagnose. So that's the first question. If you are tuning in and listening to this after the live show, that's okay, because you always have a voice, and you can still comment and you can still submit these. So we'll give you information on how to do that at the end. But we also are curious about your onset journey and what type of symptoms you had. What disease presentations did you have? And to your knowledge, how similar were those to what we would call textbook? What you might find if you looked up your disease on Mayo Clinic, or John Hopkins, or a website such as that, or even an organization nonprofit's website, or the American College of Rheumatology, or EULAR, which is the European League Against Rheumatism. We're international. So
Right.
if you're in a different part of the country. So that's the second thing. We're curious about that. So we're asking this because when we share our stories and when we start to communicate with each other, that's when we can connect the dots. That's when we can say, hmm, interesting, because what you're reporting in your early disease isn't what the point list that's on these reputable sites is saying. And it's not that it doesn't count, it's just maybe that's not the most common, so they don't make the list. And I think the point of this is we all have such unique diseases, such unique journeys, right?
Yeah.
um
Yeah. We
and
do. We do. It's a unique journey altogether.
absolutely. So our organization really works hard to make sure that we're listening to what the patients are saying, so that we can compare to what the other stakeholders are saying, and then create solutions that make good outcomes for our community. And there's two examples that we're gonna talk about here, and then we're gonna let you know how you can get involved to help build these projects. And Traci has been, so as we said earlier, if you're just tuning in, Traci has been a volunteer with us for a few years now. But even before a volunteer, you participated in some of our projects
Yep.
because you were with the International Still's Disease Foundation, and they happen to be part of the first project that we're going to mention. So in 2013, our organization recognized uh, this gap in what patients are saying their early disease is, and what
Right.
we're seeing at credible sites like the American College of Rheumatology, Mayo Clinic, National Institute of Health. So what we did is we went online and we wrote down what every symptom, or we copied what every symptom was for 6 different diseases. So we had included rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome. At the time, it was ankylosing spondylitis, which is now called axial spondyloarthritis, and then Still's disease. And it was adult onset Still's disease. And we thought we're going to make a comparison chart across, like say this is what all of these symptoms are that each one of these reputable sites classify as one of these 6 diseases. What was interesting is when we did the cross comparison, not one, Traci, not one of those had the same matching description, which was a little strange because you think, well, shoot, even the textbooks, right? Even the textbook isn't, or the isn't the
Yeah.
same, right?
Yeah.
So if
Exactly.
if they're
Exactly.
not the same, then how are we supposed to have a full understanding? So then we enlisted the help of other organizations, which again goes back to our global network philosophy.
Right.
The International Still's Disease Foundation, which is how we first connected, got involved to help us better understand Stills. Our organization covered rheumatoid arthritis. We had the Spondylitis Association of America helping with ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis. And then we had the Sjogren's Syndrome Foundation for Sjogren's, and we had Lupus UK, United Kingdom, for lupus. And
Right.
what we asked everyone to do, and at the time that was Melly, so Patricia Borner, who was the CEO, but we call her Melly. So if she's listening, hey Melly, and she helped us to, along with all of the other representatives from the other nonprofits, they supplied us a list of additional symptoms that they as an organization had collected or were are known to be associated. We created a survey based on all of those collectively. And I don't know if you remember, Traci, because it was a while ago, but it was a long survey. It was like it took about an hour
Yeah,
for
yeah, I
for
remember for an
people.
hour, and I'm like, oh my
An
gosh.
hour. And
I was
so
like, oh, am I gonna ever get this done?
it was long. It
And
was
at that time, I
long.
was still on dial-up.
Yeah, it was long. But what was amazing about it is we said to patients, okay, if you have one of the or more, because there could be dual diagnosis, if you have these diseases, we understand it's retrospective, which means we're thinking back. We're thinking back. So we did have to make a cutoff of a 20-year diagnosis. Not that people couldn't remember, but we were asking them to remember early onset, and that can blur together. So
Oh yeah,
we
and
had that.
even now, I still have little bits and pieces of like, oh my god, I had that when I started with this.
Yeah,
Yeah, and never put two
and
and two together.
people start exactly, and we did have a lot of patients have these aha moments too that said, "Wow, I started thinking about it for the first time, like really thinking," and it's amazing to me that I when I think back on my journey, but it took 60 minutes, and I mean thorough because it went through every part of your body did have you had onset, and we wanted it to be early, so we said we were looking for first symptom, which was within 6 months, first year, and then second year or after. And that was all of the areas of the body that could be impacted, but it also was all of the every symptom that every one of those nonprofits told us, plus the expert sites. And no matter what diagnosis you had, you could choose from those. And then we were able to sort of sort out what would come
Right.
about. Like, for example, Still's disease by far had the sore throats, and then some from
Yeah,
Sjogren's, which
and
which makes
positive mono.
sense. But which makes
Right.
sense though for Sjogren's because of dryness, right? But it's a different
Yeah.
reason for the
Right.
sore throat.
Right.
But what was interesting by putting all of those symptoms together, regardless of what your end diagnosis was, it really crystallized the differentiation of some of them, but it also showed the overlap. And that was
Right.
key because we felt if it shows the overlap, then we can start to help primary care physicians or hospitals by saying, if you see XYZ, get them to a rheumatologist
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it
Exactly.
could be one of these six diseases, right? So that was kind
Right.
of our outcome. That's what we wanted. And that was the findings that we had were pretty amazing. We do have the findings if you go on our website at aiarthritis.org/early symptom study. And I think there's a hyphen in between each of those words. We have a research poster, and we'll give you a link to this after the fact. I'll put it in the dialogue on our Facebook page, and if you're listening to this after the fact, it will be on our podcast episode page of when we air this on the podcast. But but so Traci, what I'm going to add, because you can't see this, I'm just going to out of just if you had to name your top, let's say, 4 symptoms in your early disease journey, what would you say they were?
The joint pain from the
Mm-hmm.
hips down.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the constant sore throat, and the chronic fatigue. Those are the top three right there. And then just in general, not feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
Not feeling good at all. That right there sums me up.
Okay. So
I mean,
no,
there was
that
so much crossover.
mhm.
I mean, I was constantly being tested for mono, and I was getting positive results all the time. And I'm like, where in the heck is this mono coming from? Because I'm not, I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy. And then when I saw that positive mono results were common among us AOSD patients, I was like, holy cow.
Right. Right. And that's one of those things too that we would say a differentiation. So there's some that are overlap that gets you in the door to a
Mhm.
referral to a specialist, and then it's the reliance on the specialist, which sometimes that's a barrier all in itself, but at least you're getting in the door earlier
Right,
to
right. Like
monitor
with
everything. And
AOSD, it's a diagnosis by ruling out.
right, exactly. So what was interesting is it did not matter what diagnosis you had of those six. And again, if you're just tuning in, it was rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, Sjogren's, axial spondyloarthritis, lupus, or adult onset Still's disease. Fatigue by far well over 75%, regardless of the diagnosis. And then also this kind of feeling of unwell or myalgia. It was the strongest in lupus and adult onset Still's disease, but still over 50% in the other four. The joints, the stiffness, significant stiffness after rest across the board, except for Sjogren's. Sjogren's was 50 something percent, and the rest of them were well over 75%. So the point
Wow.
of this is you look at the chart, and again, we'll share this chart with you. You look at the chart and you can pinpoint and say, if these happened early in disease, because this is what the patient's telling us, not what the
Mm.
textbook is telling us, theoretically, they should be red flags. Oh, I like that red flag because we have the racing theme. It's like red flag,
Yay!
right? Like stop,
Let's go.
stop, caution, danger. You should then refer. So the point of all of this is, it was about the patient voice that happened. The other thing, and I don't know if you knew this or not, Traci, but the other thing that we tested in this project was we are, as our organization, we're pretty proud of the fact that we focus very strongly on what we call undifferentiated disease. And
Mm.
that often is what people are diagnosed with before they have an actual diagnosis. So the
Right.
doctor may say, I'm not sure what you have, but I know because you have the fatigue, the joint pain, this
Yeah.
general feeling of being unwell, your disease has not made it to a specific pathway. It hasn't developed into one direction where I can identify it. So that would be they may be called undifferentiated connective tissue disease, undifferentiated spondyloarthritis. It could be um, inflammatory polyarthritis, which means arthritis of many places, but inflammatory, not degenerative. So there's a bunch of names that could fall under this. And at the time
Right.
we did the survey, research was showing that around 15% of patients were undifferentiated before they ever received a diagnosis. Based on our communications, I
Hmm.
mean, that seemed pretty low, that only 15% of people were waiting for this disease to develop into something else. Like they still
That
had the
that
fatigue, the joint
means
pain.
that there's not enough education of the doctors
Well,
to
if you
to
had to guess, Traci, if you had to guess, what would you say the percentage of people are, knowing all of the patients that you know who struggle to get a diagnosis but still have the symptoms there? What percentage would you guess have some sort of undifferentiated disease before they actually develop into a full blown diagnosis?
probably better than 70%.
Well, you're closer than 15. We said there was one research group that they felt it was closer to 50%, so half. And we said they seem more in line than 15. That seemed extremely low. So what we did is when patients recorded their early symptoms, we asked them, did you get a diagnosis of any type of these undifferentiated disease, whichever one your doctor called it? We have had a list of it. And what was interesting is a lot of people said, I don't know, or I don't remember. The ones that did say they received a diagnosis, an official undifferentiated, was 15%. However, when we went back and looked at all of the reported symptoms and then the diagnosis date from onset, 54% of patients could have qualified as undifferentiated disease before
Wow.
actually. So we were right. So they were right. And so we learned that. That was a really important study that we did. And ever since then, undifferentiated disease has been something that we talk a lot about because we've been there. If you have ever waited for a diagnosis, whether you had an undifferentiated diagnosis or not, that was you. And we don't want anybody to be in that limbo,
No,
right?
no, it's not fair to the patient. It's not fair to their families.
And I
You
do
stuck
want
in
to
that spot.
I do want to add though, we will do a breakout conversation too on undifferentiated disease. We're not going to go into it today, but one of the things I do want to point out is I was talking to a rheumatology researcher just a couple days ago, and they had some really great insight on undifferentiated and why it can be an extremely positive thing because those patients often will have a less aggressive form of disease because it didn't sprout out immediately. It wasn't as obvious, right?
Right.
Again, we'll talk about that at a different time, but I wanted to say that and throw that in so that it doesn't come across that we're saying it's a bad thing to be undifferentiated.
No,
It's just you need to be treated for it. That's where the harm may lie because if you're not treated, as you know, Tracy, we can have
yeah.
uncontrolled
Well,
disease.
it's like when I finally got diagnosed in 2003, 2004. The doctor's like, I can't undo 20 years of damage. All I can do now is slow it down and try to arrest it. You know, and I looked at him like, what are you talking about? Damage done. I got to move forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm reading a lot of comments here. I'm looking down. I see some. Hey, hi Zoe. She says hi, ladies. I see Leah. Bush, she's watching. Lisa. So hi everybody, and yeah, there. Thank you for sharing your stories. We're getting a lot of people sharing stories about their onset and not being textbook, which again, we call it at our organization typical atypicals because it seems like there's more typical people. The typical is really atypical, and I think that it's important to note the reason why our diseases, regardless of which one, they're from the immune system.
Yeah.
And there are two sides of the immune system. Again, there is a whole other podcast show just on this topic with Dr. Concias. So he is talking about the differentiation. So we'll link to that. But what to understand of why there's that uniqueness is we have two sides of the immune system. We have the autoimmune, which is acquired. So it typically will take an environmental trigger plus the natural genetics, plus the natural family history or your
Right.
genetic makeup. Then you have the autoinflammatory side, which is what Still's disease falls under. And that's considered innate or inborn. And so often that might be the trigger of a genetic mutation or infection that's triggering something. So it might have a different trigger. It also, there is a lot of research suggesting that there are environmental factors that can happen and trigger an autoinflammatory as well. But the fact of the matter is they both stem from the immune system. And when the immune system is triggered and that inflammation travels throughout the bloodstream into different parts of our body, it's attacking joints, yes. But depending on the pathway, it could hit our organs, right? Our tissues, your skin, in the case of Still's disease.
Yeah,
So
it's very systemic. It can attack every system, body system. At some point or another, it will attack every system.
exactly. And so the point is it's hard to be textbook. And some people are, and that's great because that obviously will help with
Yeah,
a lot of things, including treatment access. We can go down the line, but a lot aren't. And even the people who are textbook, everyone has some sort of individuality because our onset is all different. We're all different people. We have genetic makeup that's different. So I mean, we're
right,
all
right.
human. We're
And
all different humans. So you think about this roadmap. If we were all like, if you, me, and everybody listening said we're all going to end up at Tracy's house to have a party, Although
Oh
we're
my
in
gosh.
COVID, so we all have to stay 6 feet away. But let's just say theoretically we did.
I
The
have
thing,
backyard big enough.
even your next door neighbor and the person down the street, everybody would have a slightly different path to get to your house. Everyone would.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's the same philosophy, right? And because of that reason, we need to talk to patients to fully understand when we talk about early disease, when we talk about disease progression, as even we get diagnosed, those things are important to follow because it is important for us to get not only diagnosed, but once we get diagnosed, to make sure that we're getting access to the treatments that work best for our bodies. And that is also a separate podcast that we will be airing live. I think it's on Tuesday. We'll be with the Rheumatology Nurses Society talking about precision medicine. So all of us will wrap together.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I'm due up for a medication change and they have not a clue what they're going to send me to.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that was one of our projects that I said that was in 2013, and
Right.
we do plan on using the data for that to help. We've always said we would like to create, excuse me, patient reported early disease detection modules of some sort. And if you tuned in
Right.
yesterday, anyone who tuned in yesterday, if you didn't, still on Facebook, we did a live show with Sue Schrant. She is with a company she started called Expect and does a lot of work predominantly in this early detection and teaching primary care physicians how to recognize certain diseases. And she's done work in rheumatoid arthritis specifically, and as a person living with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and grown up, because that's she owns business and runs this, so she's grown up. But she's amazing, and she was on the show. And then we also had Dr. Kim, a rheumatologist, and we were sort of brainstorming how do we get to those early detection modules? What's the next step? So
Right.
so we did talk about that yesterday, and some of the things that we came up with was understanding the language that doctors speak as opposed to what we speak, so that when we're going into the doctor's office, they're hearing us and we're not just using our own terminology. And that's one of the things that we'll focus on as we move forward with this. And the other thing is just really here. So we'll be collecting information not only of the early symptoms and your early stories, but then we want to revisit with all of us, all of the people who are living with these diseases, and start to share ways that we can speak similar languages, similar terms that then can help the doctors. And it could be lived experiences as well. For example, I remember when I had onset, I would say, my bed is really uncomfortable. I thought it was time for a new mattress. I mean, did you have things like that? You're like, why does this
I did,
chair
and
suddenly
it's
you know,
funny because that's also about the time that I started sleeping with a pillow between my knees. Because
that's what
at
I'm
that
talking
point,
about. That's what we're
that's that at that point that just touching my knees, and I, in reading through the years the literature, they say that the still shows up in the smaller bones in the wrists and the hands. Well, mine never showed up there. Mine showed up in everything from the hips down
right.
initially. Now I do have it in my hands, but I'm still finding that, yeah, I thought it was time for new pillows. I thought it was time for a new bed. I don't
Yep.
like bed sheets. It's time for, I need,
And
yeah,
so that's what we were talking about yesterday is, we'll go to the doctor and we'll try to explain this severe stiff, oh, we're really stiff, or well, we're fatigued. And then Dr. Kim would say, well, you know how many people in the world are fatigued or complain of stiffness? And it's like, I didn't even think about that because you don't know what their lived experience of stiffness or fatigue is. So
well,
if we just said, well, if somebody has fatigue and stiffness, refer them, we need more. We need to differentiate that fatigue and that stiffness. And some of our lived experiences like that, if ask
yeah,
a patient, do they feel like it's time for a new bed? That could
yeah,
be it, you know,
exactly.
that
exactly. Now,
that could
something
be a
else,
trigger.
yeah, something else that I just wanted to bring up right quick. Chronic fatigue is one of those things that's a pretty good big feature of all of these diseases, a majority of them. But through the years, I've had doctors tell me, "Oh, well, chronic fatigue doesn't exist."
Well, and
Oh,
there's a
well,
on a
I'll tell you what, when you come spend a week at my house and sit here and watch me fall asleep while I'm eating my dinner, and my husband takes my plate before I dump it on the floor.
yeah. Well, that I mean that's a whole that again is a whole other
Oh yeah,
topic because a lot of patients are misdiagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome first because they're so tired. That's just what they're diagnosed with. And what it really is autoimmune or autoinflammatory. That's caught that inflammation
exactly,
throughout the
exactly.
bloodstream is really,
But I
yeah.
don't know
So
if
that
you
I mean
remember
that in itself
when
is,
we talked about chronic fatigue syndrome, the yuppie syndrome. And it's like, oh God, no.
yeah. So anyway, we will definitely link you to this because we're not done with this work. Something else that we will circle back to this week. We're doing these live Autoball episodes and linking you to additional resources and projects and past episodes that we aired prior so that you can gain more information. But I will be live, and I'm sorry I don't know the time, but on Monday, depending again when you're listening to this, if you're tuning in later and this is a recorded podcast, you can still, we'll tell you at the end how you can still find all of this information. But I will be live with Caleb Michoud, who is with the Forward National Data Bank, formerly National Data Bank for Rheumatic Diseases, and they are building a data bank for us, the AiArthritis Data Bank, that will capture all of the research that we're doing into these early symptoms modules, plus a lot of other work that we're doing. And from there, together, we will create more information on these early symptoms and be able to capture that. And there's some other exciting news, but I'm going to wait for you all have to tune in with Caleb and find that out. But that's where we're taking this next. So we're going to take the data we had before and we're going to build on it. So we need your voices to continue so that we can start to develop these educational materials. And so that is going to happen. And speaking of that, Traci, you know about the next project that we wanted to bring up, which is the patient-reported Still's disease brochures. As
Yes, ma'am.
you have been part of that. Why don't you tell everyone how these even came about? How this
Well,
project came about?
We used to have them through ISDF, but when we dissolved, we no longer had them because that was something you guys didn't do. But Crystal, I guess, had put out a post, if I recall, about what was needed, and one of these things that came up was we need information to be able to share this information with our doctors that don't know what adult onset Still's disease is, or how do we share this with our family so that they understand and they know to give this information. So hence the current project of
Right.
the new brochures. And I can't remember the name of the company that is kind of helping with
Sobi Pharmaceuticals is where
yeah, North
we
Makers
got
of
the grant.
right?
Mm.
Yeah.
They're-
They're helping, and the response has been wonderful among just those that have responded. There's more coming. We've got final reviews coming up on it, and I'm looking forward to that project coming to a conclusion and fruition.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
it is important, because you wouldn't believe the number of nurses I've come across. Well, what is adult onset Still's disease? And I have to educate them. And they're like, well, where can we go dig up more information? And that's where, I send them to you guys. I send them to WebMD, or to, actually not even WebMD. I really send them to Mayo or to NIH to go digging, to educate
Absolutely.
themselves. Because
Absolutely.
there's nobody in my area other than me that I know of with adult onset Still's disease.
Right. And it is a rare disease for those of you who are not familiar with the disease. And again, it is stems from the autoinflammatory side, the innate side of the immune system, whereas autoimmune stem from the other side, but both immune system. And it is a rare disease, and it is often extremely systemic and individualized. And so what happened was our organization, again, the International Still's Disease Foundation dissolved in 2017, and they asked us to house the existing materials that they had just so it had a home. And so somebody was still advocating, and we already had Still's disease as in the top 9 diseases that we cover anyway. So it wasn't a far stretch. The problem is that we do not typically focus on just one disease. We will focus as the group of a whole, and then how to differentiate those, because our mission isn't necessarily to zero in. There's a lot of organizations that focus on the individual diseases, lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. Problem is when the bye to the still, so they're the Systemic JIA Foundation and HALA, because I know some of the Leah's on there, some people from there, and they have amazing resources. And so I often, for specific stills, might send them that way, or to NORD, or like you said, the National Institute of Health, because as an organization, that's not what we do. We're not typically there to give information on what all of these different diseases do, because there's usually places you can find that. And then we focus on solving the problems to bring the patient voice to the table. In saying that, as you said, Traci, we Crystal, who is also one of our long-term volunteers, had posted in this support group that we took over to manage for ISDF when they dissolved. And we kept seeing posts saying, when ISDF dissolved, we lost our brochures. And now, and since there is no other organization that solely focuses on it like others, where are we going to get brochures? And so that was a little bit of an issue. And then again, Systemic JIA Foundation and Autoinflammatory Alliance did partner to do some really cool business card size, more for medical purposes, to bring to the offices, and we don't duplicate efforts. So I talked to them, and we shared and learned about that. But the patients were asking for something a little bit different as well. They wanted, like you said, information that was to help families understand, to help something quick too, that maybe they could write their unique stills, so it didn't necessarily have all the textbook. It will have textbook, but also some sort of space where they can fill in their individual. So if they go to a hospital or a specialist or a new doctor, they can bring it and say, well, here, this is kind of an overview, but I've written in for you my still.
Exactly. And I have paramedic friends that say that something like that is so important, even to them as paramedics, because sometimes you might be in a position, if you're incapacitated or you're not thinking clearly enough to be able to say, hey, I have this, and this going on, and it's related to this. But, if they come in, like for me, I had the old brochures. I always kept them up on the back of my door, my front door, with magnet for a while there. My kids all had them. My husband had them. I had them in the vehicle. So, and instead I just wrote across the top, I have this, and in the end, educate patient education, but also education to share to them, to others that might have a part in your care. So
exactly.
important. And there's not enough words to,
right
to explain it to somebody.
Yeah. And so that's what also made it unique, was the community was asking for a few different things. They wanted something, whereas like you mentioned in the beginning, you said, I wrote it down. You said, when I was diagnosed, my doctor said, this is your diagnosis, kind of sent me on my way. And you were left to kind of scramble and figure out what this was. And you were seeing things that scared you. So we would like something that doctors could hand to a person and be general enough, but still that also can be handed to family and friends to understand. But in addition, we need something that can then be brought to the specialist. That's more about your uniqueness. If you're going to a hospital, something quick you could put in your wallet or your purse. So really what we decided is we had to do a couple different things. And so these brochures, I mean, it's more than just a brochure. We decided that what we needed was to create patient reported Still's disease brochures that captured not only the clinical textbook of stills, but also we secured the hashtag my stills. So these are called my stills, hashtag,
Yes.
and then in those. We are also going to have like a link or an asterisk saying here's some of the research we did that there's some other things that have presented. Now we are working with the people at the Center of Autoinflammatory Diseases at Stony Brook University. So shout out to them, the doctors there, and they are reviewing the data that we had collected. So, they might be able to say, well, this isn't really unique. This was actually sounds like it's a comorbidity. So they'll be able to kind of weed some of them out, but we will have a link so that so that people can say, well, oh, this also, that's kind okay, that maybe
Yeah.
this is, and then researchers might see a connection and say, well, maybe this is related, to still. So we're hoping on the
Exactly.
back end,
Exactly. And
based on patient testimony, right? That, oh, well, maybe we
exactly.
should be looking into this. The second
Yeah.
thing,
Exactly.
the second part of that is that we wanted to make sure that that we had something that patients could bring. So in addition to a space on those brochures where patients can handwrite something to add to family or friends or whoever to say
Right.
this is my stills. Then we have these kind of folding we'll have these folding brochures that can fold up and be taken in a moment's notice to a hospital or to a specialist, to give a little bit more information about your journey, as well. So it's a little bit of an education from patient layman's terms, which again I have spoken with the other organizations that I mentioned and said, we're more than happy to send their brochures too, because we are a global network and we have no problem promoting what they've done as well, because
Exactly.
together we're stronger. So we that going together, even a better packet. um, anyway, so that is now in the next phase. We have conducted the research. So any of you who participated, thank you. We had over 100 people that participated this time. We had 68 a few years ago in that original early symptoms. So we can combine that data and send off to Stony Brook. And the next step is to finalize the brochure. So we want to finalize the design of the brochures. And even though we have the idea, and I had already kind of explained how it was going to work, we want to make sure that the content that is important to patients is in there. So if you do have adult on Still's disease, uh, or you have systemic JIA, or you're a parent of a person, anyone in that realm. So Still's disease has the same etiology, regardless if it's children versus adults. So I'd like to throw that out. So we are looking at stills altogether, not just adult onset Still's disease. Still's disease is a continuum. And in saying that, we want to make sure that everybody has a voice and knows that what we're putting out there is what they want. Now we know there can always be too many cooks in the kitchen. You're not going to be able to just change the whole design, but majority vote, I guess. But as long as we have enough people say, sign off and say, yeah, I think this is a good direction. There's only so much we can do. So we are going to provide a link for you to do that. But it is, you can just go to our website at aiarthritis.org and you can search under initiatives and you'll see the patient reported Still's disease brochure. So that is the next step that we're doing there. But that's really what we wanted to talk about here, today, that we are different and we need the patient voice to talk to other stakeholders and understand these innuendos that they may not understand unless they speak with us, right? And
Exactly.
and and
Exactly.
and we're all different. So while Traci can speak on behalf of her community or people she knows with the diseases as I can, the bottom line is we all have experiences, we all have different perspectives, and as an organization that is global, we need all voices at the table. And so we are asking you, if you are, if number one, if you have any type of stills from juvenile, to adult, we really hope that you will participate in reviewing these brochures. But if you are a person with any of the diseases that fall under our umbrella, we are working on developing these early symptom detection models, and it's very important that as many people as possible can get involved in this. Think about your journey, and wow, we could save so many people from that
Yeah.
from that long journey, of getting
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Even saving just a week or two makes a difference. Because I mean, the damage I had from such a long period of time was just, we're finding it out every week,
Yep.
every day. I'm finding out that, okay, this next set of MRIs, this next set of x-rays is going to show something that I don't want to see. I know that it's tied to this.
Hmm.
So, you know, you get to a point where you don't want to see it. You don't want to hear any more about it, but you live it because you have to. And like you said, as a voice, we have to be global because one voice might be able to change that outlet of thousands of other people. And that's where I'm at. I'm One voice can make the difference.
One voice
One
can,
is
and the real fact of the matter is, when one voice plus one voice plus one voice, and you just keep adding them together. And if one voice
yeah.
can make a little bit, can make a difference, imagine what a million voices can do, right?
Well, it's just like years ago in church, they were trying to think of a name for initiative, and they're like, oh well, we need something, and it was 2020 hindsight, and then somebody's like, well, how do I make this better? And it's 2020 double vision, and that's kind of where we're at. We're at that point where it's time to be a bigger person, make this circle grow, because if we don't, there's not going to be a there's not going to be a fix.
Yep, you got it.
And
You hit it, nail, Pew, right there. So I also just want to add before we wrap up here. We've talked about these Still's disease brochures, but we as an organization, what we have decided, because it's so important, that after we wrap this one up, because I think that it will tie in very nicely with all of the work we're doing for the early symptom detection modules,
right,
as well. There's kind of a tie-in, that we hope to then be able to go back and use the Still's disease brochure model to hit the other diseases. So go
yes,
back: rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, Sjogren's syndrome, lupus, and
right,
spondyloarthritis and Behçet's disease. I mean, we've got to there's about 20 so diseases. I mean, we can't do them all at once, but we can do what
we
we
do them
can
a little at a
a
time,
little at a time. It's all we can do. And then obviously contact other organizations that also cover those umbrellas and go in on it together, because again, together we're stronger. But that would
together you're
be,
stronger, and there's more funding available to help cover the cost of this if you share. It cuts it
well,
down.
what, yeah, and how that would work, just so people, we would go and request funding for this. It would be a project that we would request, so, or call for donations specifically for something like that, like, oh, is that something that you would like us to do, then you please support it. So there's
Exactly.
kind of two ways to go about doing that. Well,
Yeah.
Traci, I want to thank you. You did fabulous.
Thank you.
You
Thank
were
you.
worried.
I'm new to this world, like I said, but I've enjoyed it. And, every time you and I get to talk is great, and getting to share the story, you have to get it out there.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. But out to my Stills family out there, hey, together we got to do this. You
Yeah.
know,
That's a
we got
good
to slay
that
this dragon together.
that's really the best message for everyone in our community. So as we start to close out this show, the bottom line is we as an organization firmly believe that the patient needs to be at the table as an equal with the other stakeholders, and in this case the other stakeholders being doctors and researchers, other organizations, so that we can create these early detection disease modules, and also disease patient reported disease brochures, starting with Still's disease is the first one we're doing. So if you want to learn more about any of these projects that we've talked about today, you can go to AiArthritis.org, and you can go under initiatives and you'll see those. There's also on the brochure, the Still's disease brochures page, there is a button that you can push and you can sign up to help us review the final design of these. So make sure that you do that. Also, please register for this auto ball. We are doing this as our annual gala. Was supposed to be the first in person. Tammy was going to come and join us here in St. Louis, Missouri. And the point was to really start going offline and reach more people that way, introduced to different companies and hospitals, et cetera. So it's important that people know we're here. And so we've grown so much since we just had our 9th birthday on May 7th. So, we're asking for two things here in addition, well, three things: for you to get involved, if you are a person living with these diseases. Also, please share that we're here. Tell people about us so that they know about the work we're doing, because the more people who know, the more people we can help. So make sure that you're sharing. And we were all, of course, thankful for everyone who is willing to support us. We're throwing it out there and saying, while you go to aiarthritis.org/autoball, you can submit your stories, tell us more about your journey. There's a button there to do that. But also, please consider a donation. We are 9 plus 1 to grow on, so we're suggesting $10. If you can afford $10, we certainly would appreciate it. Also, forwarding our website or this Facebook page to 10 other people, so 10 and 10, get the word out, and hopefully we'll be able to raise the funds that we need to keep these types of initiatives moving through to 2021. But other than that, you can find this episode soon on our website, as well as all episodes at aiarthritis.org/podcast. And make sure that if you listen to podcasts, you subscribe. AiArthritis Voices 360. So subscribe to us and give us a review. Thank you again, Tammy.
Thank you for inviting
And
me.
yes, and thank all of you who are tuning in and listening. Please pull up a seat at the table, because, as we've said, only together can we really truly change the stories of tomorrow. So thank you all for joining us on this episode.